Hi, I'm George Maestri, and today we're going to take a look at photorealistic rendering of SketchUp files in Blender 3D. Now, Blender 3D is a free 3D application that has a really nice photorealistic renderer. And I find it's a great way to get a low cost rendering system for SketchUp. Now, when you use a third party renderer with SketchUp, you typically have to export out of SketchUp in a known file format and then import it into the rendering system. And Blender is no different. So here I have a simple scene, and before we export, we want to make sure that we have everything as organized as possible. So I've gone ahead and made sure the walls, the roof, and the floor of this building are all components, as well as the bed, which was just a simple component dragged in from the component library. Now, when we export, we can export in a number of formats. Now, Blender accepts a lot of different formats, and I find for Blender the best one is OBJ or FBX. Now, if you're using SketchUp Make, you may be limited to Collada. So I'm going to go File, Export, 3D Model. Now, if you have SketchUp Pro, you will have more options here, but SketchUp Make users will have Collada as well. Now, I've already gone ahead and exported this, so let's go ahead into Blender and take a look at what this looks like. Now, I've downloaded Blender and installed it, and I've opened up a file here called Blender Render Lights.blend. And this is basically just a scene with a couple of simple things in it. It has a camera, has a sun, which is a light source, and then also has a plane, which I've hidden, but we'll take a look at that in just a bit. So I'm going to go ahead and import my file here. So I'm going to go File, Import, and you can see here we have a lot of different types of files here. So we have 3D Studio, FBX, we have Collada. I'm going to use OBJ or Wavefront. And when I do that, we're going to go over to our Q2 folder here, and I should have blenderrender.obj. And so I'm going to go ahead and import that. And as you can see, it comes in. Now, once this file is in the scene, we should learn a little bit about Blender navigation. Now, if you want to learn a lot more about Blender, we have a Blender Essential Training. We have Introduction to 3D, which has a nice little mini course on Blender. And we also have some courses on rendering in Blender. But the basic of navigation in Blender is very simple. Rotation of the scene is the middle mouse button. Pan is Shift plus the middle mouse button, and zoom can be done either by rolling the middle mouse button or doing Control and the middle mouse button. So that will allow you to navigate, and then you select in Blender by using right-click in the viewport, or you can select here in what's called the outliner, which is very similar to the outliner in SketchUp. In fact, let's go ahead over to this outliner and take a look at how this all came in. You can see here I've got the floor model came in, the walls, the roof, but a lot of this bed here kind of came in as separate little pieces. And as you can see, as I click on them, they highlight in the scene. So one of the things you may have to do when you bring things in from SketchUp is to join or combine all of these objects into single objects that will make it easier to manage. So we're going to do that with the bed. So as you can see, we have a lot of objects with the word mattress in them. So I'm going to hold down the Shift key and select all of these. And notice how these are highlighting here on the left. So I'm going to select all of the things that have the word mattress in the title. And make sure that they're all highlighted. And then I'm going to open up this little window here. See this little plus sign here? That should open up a tools panel. And then I'm going to press join. And what that does is it joins all of those together into one object. And let's do the same for the bed frame. So I'm going to go ahead and select bed leg 1, 2, the bed frame, and so on. So anything with the word bed in it. So as you can see, we've selected all of these are highlighted with those little circles. And again, I'm going to join them. So now we've got just a few objects in our scene, and it's going to make it easier to manage. Now, once we have all of our objects in our scene, we can start to light our scene. Now, one of the nice things about Blender and its rendering system is that it is GPU based. In other words, if you have a fast graphics card, you're going to get some really nice response. And we can turn this on by going into File, User Preferences, make sure we go over to System, and then down here you'll see Cycles Compute Device. We want to turn it on to CUDA if you have an NVIDIA card. So we want to switch it from none to this option here. And then we want to make sure that we're in the Cycles Renderer here, and then all we have to do is change our viewport. So we can change the type of viewport along the bottom here. So you can see here we've got this little textured cube here. If we want, we can go to wireframe. We can go to solid mode. Or if we go all the way up to the top, we can go to what's called rendered mode. And when I do that, look what happens. I get some rendering. Very simple. And this is one of the nice benefits of Blender's rendering system, is that it is fast and pretty easy to use. Now, when you start rendering here, you also may have to turn on one more little switch. And so I'm going to go over here to this one that looks like a photograph or a camera. And you can see that the device you want to use, you want to make sure that it's on GPU, so that way you get a fast response. And this is also where we can set all of our render settings here. But I'm going to skip over that for now. Now, if we want, we can also render in a separate viewport to make this a little bit easier. So what I'm going to do is go ahead down here to where we said rendered, and I'm going to go back to texture, and this will be a little bit faster in terms of manipulation. But I still want to see my rendering. So what I'm going to do is go up here to the top corner. You see we have these little lines. I'm going to left click and drag to the right, and that just brings out another viewport. And in fact, if I want, I can close this off. And now I can render this. And if I want, I can make this a little bit smaller by, again, left-clicking here and dragging down. So now I have a little viewport here that has my rendering, so I can see it. But I also have these viewports here where I can actually navigate and manipulate things. So one of the first things we want to do is take a look at the lights in the scene. So here we have a light called the sun. So you can see here we have sun in our outliner. And if we want, you can see how we've got this little button here that says sun. So if I click on this, you can see that we have all of these properties for this particular light. So if I want, I can change the color of the light. And as you can see, the light color is changing. I'm going to leave that pretty close to white. We can also change the strength of the light. We can turn it up or we can turn it down. Another nice thing is that we can change the size of the light. Now I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. You can see that we've got some pretty sharp corners here on this light. But if we want, we can change the size from, say, 0.01 to 0.1 and watch what happens to the lighting. It gets fuzzy, and that's because the light itself is bigger. So if you want it more of a point light, you'll have sharper shadows, or you can adjust that. So I'm going to put it at 0.03. Give it slightly soft edges there. Now we can also adjust the light. So if you want to rotate things in Blender, you can use these tools here. So notice here we have select. We also have move, rotate, and scale. So I'm going to put this on rotate, and I'm going to change this from global to local. And this will allow me to rotate the light fairly easily. And as you can see, as I rotate this sun, it actually is rotating the light in the scene. Now, the one nice thing about this sunlight is that the position of the light doesn't really matter. It's basically mimicking the sun, so it's coming from all directions. And Blender also has a number of other types of lights. So let's take a look at those. Now, one of the other types of lights is that we can actually turn an object into a light. So here I have an object called a plane, and I've actually hidden that. You can see this little eye here is hidden. So if I want to, I can turn this on, and notice how it creates a separate source of light in the scene. So if I want to, I can affect the light by adding in objects that are illuminative. Now, another way to add light into the scene is through the environment. So you can see here on this panel here, we have a world button. And if you scroll down, we can actually add a surface to the world, or we can turn on and off what's called ambient occlusion. So if I turn off ambient occlusion, notice what it does. It basically turns off almost all the light in the scene. If I turn it on, it basically creates bounce light in the scene. So I'm going to turn that off for now. And let's go ahead under World and under Surface, I'm going to go ahead and add in what's called a background. Now, typically, this is where you would add in either a color or you can add an image in to create image-based lighting. So I'm going to go ahead and, as you can see, we can change the color. So I'm going to change the color to kind of a light blue to give it more of a sky effect. And then as we zoom in here, you can see how we're getting kind of like a blue light through the windows. And then we can also adjust the strength of that by manipulating this dial here. And again, if we want to, we can turn on or off ambient occlusion to add in that light. I can also turn on this plane and adjust its lighting as well by selecting it, going over here to Material, and as you can see, we've got a strength meter here. So if I want to, I can turn that down a little bit or turn it up. Now, this actually brings up the materials in the scene, and we're actually not seeing those at this point. And that's because we've lost the link to the image files that we were using. So let's go ahead and start off with the roof. I'm going to go ahead and click on the roof model. Go over to the Materials tab here, and if you notice, we've got two materials on this. We have wood lumber and then we have snow for the white part of the back of the room. So we're going to actually play with wood lumber. And then I'm going to add a surface to that. So I'm going to go ahead and do use nodes. And what this does is it allows me now to create a surface. So I can change the color of that if I want. As you can see, I'm changing the color of that roof. Or I can put in a texture here. So if I click on this button here, I can add in an image texture, open up in that Blender render file. I should have one called Wood Lumber Butt, and open that up. And there you go. There's our texture. Now, sometimes the texture may not map properly, but Blender does have tools for mapping if you want to use them. So let's go ahead and do another one. I'm going to go ahead to the bed frame. And as you can see, it has a wood cherry on it. So let's go ahead and, again, use nodes. And then under color, again, I'm going to press this button, image texture, open up wood cherry original. And now, as you can see, I've got that here. And as you can see, we can also have this in this mode here. So if I keep this on texture, I should be able to see the texture and the mapping here. Now, as you can see, we're starting to get some nice effects here. Now, if I want, I can also go to the floor of the object and again, add in another image. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and open up wood floor. And open that. And as you can see, now we have some images here. Now, in this case, we've basically been rendering in a live viewport. But if we want to restrict it to a camera, we can do it. So I'm going to go in the bottom left viewport here, and just under View, I'm going to select Camera. And what this does is it just selects the view of the camera that is in the scene. So if we select that here, you can see that we have this camera in the scene. And if we go to move, we can move that camera and position it how we want. We can also go into the camera tab and we can change things such as focal length, the size of the sensor, and so on. Now, once we have all of this in place, we can do a quick render. So all we have to do is do render, render image, and this should render what's in this bottom left viewport. And here we have the final render. As you can see, it's fairly straightforward to render in Blender, but of course this is just a very brief overview of the process. So again, if you want to understand Blender a little bit more, we have a wonderful essential training. We have an introduction to 3D, which also covers it. And we also have some very nice Blender rendering courses. So if this interests you, go ahead and start playing with SketchUp to Blender, and hopefully you'll make some really great images.